The battle raged around them, a clash of steel, spirit and fury that echoed across the battlefield. Liang Zhen, his mind focused entirely on the task at hand, was a whirlwind of controlled violence. His body had become a weapon, moving with the precision of a predator, each strike calculated and deadly. The Celestial Court's soldiers, elite enforcers trained and relentless, fell before him like autumn leaves before a storm. But despite the chaos, despite the violence, Liang Zhen felt something gnawing at him, a growing weight in his chest that had nothing to do with the battle. The cost of power, the price of rebellion. Every strike, every death felt like a small piece of his soul being chipped away. He had once sat atop the throne of the celestial realm, a god among mortals. Now, he was a broken king, fighting for a cause he could scarcely define, surrounded by those who saw him as a leader, but whom he could barely trust. His thoughts flickered back to the whispers he had heard in the shadows of the camp, of men and women who had joined the rebellion not for ideals, not for justice, but because they had nowhere else to go. They were lost, they were broken, and Liang Zhen, despite his power, despite his resolve, was beginning to wonder if he was any different. A flash of light from the corner of his eye broke his reverie. He turned just in time to see Lady Xuan, her silhouette shimmering with an almost divine light, step onto the battlefield, her presence cutting through the chaos like a blade through flesh. Her eyes, cold and relentless, locked onto him, and for a moment everything else seemed to fade away. She was beautiful, in the way that legends were beautiful, but her beauty was the kind that made a man feel small, like the weight of the heavens themselves rested upon her shoulders. Lady Xuan, the Celestial Court's most feared enforcer, had come to make her mark. "Liang Zhen," her voice rang out, a perfect blend of elegance and menace. "You should not have returned. You are an affront to the very laws that govern our world." Liang Zhen didn't flinch, though the weight of her words pressed down on him like an invisible hand. "I didn't return for your laws. I returned to end them." The words left his mouth with a finality that echoed through the battlefield. His hand gripped the hilt of his sword, the weapon pulsing with an ancient, untapped energy, but there was something more than power in his stance. Resolve. Lady Xuan's gaze hardened, and with a graceful movement she extended her hand. The air around her shifted, whispers of power rippling outward like a tide. Liang Zhen felt it immediately, a crushing pressure, a pull that threatened to drag him under. The very earth beneath them trembled. "You will learn, as all who defy the court have learned," she said softly, her voice laced with cold certainty, "that no one, not even you, can escape the inevitable fall of the immortal." Liang Zhen surged forward, his sword a blur of motion, striking with all the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. But Lady Xuan was faster. She moved with the elegance of a dancer, her movements fluid and effortless, sidestepping his strikes as though she were nothing more than a wisp of smoke. Her hand rose, and the very air around her seemed to twist in response, shards of light coalescing into sharp, spear-like projections that hurtled toward Liang Zhen. He didn't hesitate. This was no time for hesitation. With a shout, he summoned the energy within him, a tempest of power that surged outward in a shockwave, shattering the incoming light projectiles before they could reach him. He advanced, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. Lady Xuan's eyes narrowed, and the temperature around them dropped. "Impressive," she said, her tone betraying the smallest hint of respect, but her eyes remained cold. "But it will not be enough." With a flick of her wrist, she summoned a blinding wave of energy, a torrent of celestial force that collided with Liang Zhen head-on. He barely had time to react as the wave struck him, sending him crashing to the ground, his body slamming against the earth with a force that left him gasping for breath. The battlefield seemed to hold its breath as Lady Xuan approached, her gaze fixed on the fallen Liang Zhen. The ground beneath her feet cracked, the air rippling with the power she controlled. She stopped just inches from him, her expression unreadable. "Your struggle is futile," she said, her voice no longer a command, but a whisper of something far older, far colder. "You cannot defeat the Celestial Court, and you certainly cannot defeat me." Liang Zhen pushed himself up from the ground, blood dripping from his lip, his breath ragged. The fight with Lady Xuan was far from over, and though his body screamed for rest, he would not give in. He could not yet. "You are wrong," Liang Zhen growled, his voice raw but filled with the strength of his resolve. "You may have the power of the heavens behind you, but you've never had the strength of a man who has nothing left to lose." Lady Xuan's expression shifted, just slightly, an imperceptible flicker of doubt. But it was enough. Before she could react, Liang Zhen surged forward, his sword cutting through the air like lightning. The two collided in a blaze of light and fury, a clash of two forces that were both ancient and unstoppable. Each strike from Lady Xuan was like a divine blow, each strike from Liang Zhen like a force of nature, unstoppable, relentless. The battle waged on, but it was clear that something had shifted. The Celestial Court, with all its power, had underestimated him. Lady Xuan, despite her overwhelming strength, had been caught off guard by the ferocity of his resolve. She had fought immortals before, but none had ever come at her with the intensity of a man who had been broken and reborn. And then it happened, the inevitable moment when fate made its move. Lady Xuan, weary from their exchange, made a fateful mistake. She overextended herself, leaving an opening that Liang Zhen seized with all the precision of a predator. With a roar, he drove his sword through her defense, the blade cutting through the very air with an earth-shattering sound. Lady Xuan's eyes widened, and for the first time, she faltered. A mortal blow. But before she could fall, before the light in her eyes dimmed, she raised her hand, and with a whisper, the air around them shimmered with divine energy. "This is not over, silent immortal," she hissed, her form disintegrating into particles of light. "You may have won this battle, but you will not win the war." Her voice echoed as her form dissolved, her presence vanishing like a fleeting shadow. Liang Zhen stood there, panting heavily, his sword still raised. The battlefield had fallen silent once again, but the tension in the air was thick. The rebellion had struck the first blow, but they had paid a heavy price for it. He looked around him, his heart heavy with the realization that the Celestial Court was not done with them. The cost of their rebellion had just begun to show its face, and yet, amidst the silence, there was something else, a sense of purpose, a new fire. He had defied the Celestial Court, and for the first time in centuries, they had felt his power. This was only the beginning. The Immortals' fall had only just begun.